welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and it's on the World Puja Network, and I very much appreciate the good folks at the World Puja Network giving us this time to share with you an update on what is happening with the projects with the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and Disclosure Project, as well as the Orion Project. So I'm joined today by Linda Willitts, who has worked with us for now almost 13 years in this project, and thank you, Linda, for joining me.
Oh, sure.
Great. Well, today we're going to be really focusing on some very interesting aspects of contact and how contact happens and the implications of tonality and resonance fields as it pertains to making contact with interstellar civilizations and extraterrestrial intelligence. And we're going to go through a number of things because this actually plays out on a number of fronts. And I think this is something where many people have asked about this through some emails of how the tones and how they're related to the ancient Vedic puja knowledge of and Sanskrit knowledge of mantras, and how that relates to extraterrestrial technologies. And actually they're extremely intimately related, and the Vedic knowledge on this is very important as it pertains to understanding how interstellar civilizations not only travel, but also communicate through great distances of space and time, and also how their technologies manifest in linear space-time coming from a trans-dimensional field that is faster than the speed of light. And this gets into some really interesting concepts of resonant fields and frequencies and the trans-dimensional aspects of them, and where that crossing point interfaces with tone. So one of the things that many people, I'm sure people listening on the World Puja Network must understand this if they've studied the Vedas and Sanskrit, is that there's the concept of name and form, and that is the concept that the tone and the actual sound component of a thought can, in the correct state of consciousness with the correct usage, manifest that object. And there are many accounts, for example, in the Vedas and in the literature in Sanskrit of one of the cities, Siddhis, it's pronounced cities, where masters have been able to actually go into an expanded state of consciousness and use a certain tonality and materialize a ring or a flower or a city or bilocate their body or what have you. And this has to do very much with the concepts of the Vedic sciences and how they relate to interstellar civilizations who certainly understand this. And I think that this is why one of the three components of what the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, that's CSETI.org, has been employing for about 19 years now in our contact protocols in the project known as the CE5 initiative, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is when we go out under the stars together and make open contact with these visitors. And one of the components that we use of the three is our tones. These tones that have been recorded, for example, in crop circles at around the time that they're being made, that CSETI teams have had at Mount Shasta, where a tone has come all around us from infraspace, within space around us, that everyone has heard with their ears, but when you hear it, you actually see the form of the spacecraft that is trans-dimensionally shifted beyond the speed of light around us. We're going to actually play these tones for you today so you have an idea of this. And then we also have a mantra that we use which has a tonality to it that's very specific. It's on a CD that you can get at disclosureproject.org. That's the Zen Dome meditation and also the meditation technique instruction, where I actually go through how this particular mantra, which has the tonality that's a perfect fifth. It's da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. And the mantra has a dimensional component to it that was shown to us after we had this amazing experience in the Zen Meditation Dome in Crestone, Colorado 2 years ago in the summer of '07. And this mantra, while it's been around for thousands of years, had lost its tonality. And once the tonality was shown to us and came out of this state of a samadhi state in meditation, and I clearly heard it. It made it very clear to me that the tonality of these mantras had been lost, and that's what we're now using in our meditation technique that allows people to experience the state of samadhi and expanded states of consciousness, and then from that state go into the remote viewing of distant places in space and time, and to make contact with these interstellar civilizations. So the mantras themselves are very important tones, which are thoughts, but they have the sound component of the thought. And this gets into the whole concept of how sound pre-exists form, and that the sound component of a thought, and this sounds a bit abstract, but that tonality actually manifests the form of the object in the etheric and astral level, which then manifests it in the three-dimensional reality of space-time. And that's true whether you're talking about a photon or a star or an apple or a pear tree or your own physical body, that there's actually a standing wave, a resonant frequency that's unique to your individuality within your own soul that manifests your being, that then manifests the etheric and astral body of light that you fly around with in lucid dreams at night, and that when you pass away from the physical plane and, quote, die, you're in this body of light. But then also that resonant field gives rise to the actual physical body as it passes through the various gradations and through the zero-point energy field and into the subatomic and atomic and molecular level. But the primacy exists actually with the conscious component of this resonant sound or thought that is your individuality. And the same thing is true of these special mantras. They have an effect where the mind can use them in a correct way, which is something I've been an instructor of for about 35 years, and or more than that now, I'm embarrassed to say, but time marches on, and basically you then learn that these become almost like a magic carpet ride, if you will, that allows the mind to go into deeper and more quiet and more expanded levels of consciousness. Well, in the same way, extraterrestrial communication systems utilize consciousness and thought and tonality, and often interface with our research teams out on the stars in these sort of amazing ways, not only in terms of us actually hearing these tones that come in from space all around us, but also in terms of things that we have recorded and which Colin Andrews in England has recorded within some of these crop circles, the ones that are authentic and have not been faked by some of the human fakers of the crop circles. And I think that we are finding that these tones also are now coming through our electronic devices as we have made contact over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, with the Orion transmissions in Joshua Tree National Park beginning in 2007 and really ramping up this year. So we're going to share a number of these things with you, but I think what I wanted to introduce this whole discussion with is the primacy of the thought and conscious component of sound as it actually precedes form, which then precedes the materialization of an object. And if you understand that cosmological unfolding, it's like a flower opening up from the consciousness, the level of pure consciousness and the conscious component of sound and thought into this sort of etheric and astral field of light, which makes sort of an astral blueprint, if you will, or an architectural template that then becomes the support structure for the actual materialization in the physical three-dimensional space-time. If you understand that progression, you really begin to understand how interstellar civilizations dematerialize and rematerialize from one point in space-time to another point in space-time. But you also understand how it is that when we're out making contact with these visitors, that they will often manifest in the most incredible ways involving thought, consciousness, remote viewing, sound, tones, all sorts of things up to and including, of course, fully materialized spacecraft that we've had as close as 15 to 20 feet from us. But I think that to understand really how interstellar civilizations do this, all we have to do is really understand the ancient knowledge in the puja and the Sanskrit and the ancient Vedic knowledge of the cities, because that's all been on Earth for thousands of years. And it's interesting because it's like making a full cycle from the last golden age that existed on Earth during the time of the enlightened masters in the Himalayas and the Shambhala kingdom to the time we're entering into now, where this knowledge of consciousness and sound and thought and how that interfaces and begins to explain the technological basis for interstellar travel and communication, that this is all part of what we're studying and experiencing and trying to utilize in our technologies and in our techniques for making contact with these visitors. And by the way, we're going to be up on Mount Shasta in about a week doing this, and actually less than a week now. And we're going to also be doing this in Arizona. We're going to try to do a mass meditation and consciousness contact event in Arizona in October 24th, 25th, and 26th, and it's open to the public. Any of you want to come are welcome to. And we're going to be using these tones and teaching these meditation techniques and making contact out under the stars each night till 12 or 1 in the morning. And in the afternoon, we're going to actually be discussing all of these issues, and Colin Andrews of Crop Circle fame will be there sharing these tones, but also sharing the recent amazing events that have happened in the United Kingdom this summer, where there's this sort of building level of contact happening, up to and including police officers in the area seeing extraterrestrial beings materialize and move over the fields and over a hill and what have you. And there's been just amazing levels of contact and growing levels of contact that are happening. So that's something we'll be sharing at this conference in Rio Rico outside Tucson this October, and I hope those of you who feel guided to come will join us there under the stars and learning these things together. But Linda, I don't know if you would like to share with people the history of these crop circle tones that Colin Andrews has shared with us, just sort of a synopsis, and then perhaps play them for the listeners for a few minutes so they get a sense of what they sound like.
Well, just very briefly, Colin Andrews and some other researchers were in a crop circle field back in 1989, and they were contacting the ETs in consciousness, asking them to make a crop circle. They didn't really have success in the field that they were in, so they went into a nearby crop circle. And while they were in that crop circle, these tones started happening, and they were experiencing some really strange physical phenomena as well. And basically they recorded these tones. They've been analyzed by several groups of scientists over the years and were found to be totally anomalous. They could not attribute the sounds to anything that would occur in nature. And Colin Andrews gave these to Dr. Greer to use in our CSETI work. And so what we do with them in the field is we play them in the field when we do our nighttime research, and we transmit them with little walkie-talkies out into space, and the ETs respond. And not only that, but these tones have an effect on people's consciousness. They're kind of meditative, actually, to listen to. And the clip that I'm going to play, it's we have it looped so that it plays for quite a long time in the field, but it starts out with a selection of the tones in I believe it's the real speed, and then progressively getting a little slower.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. So would you like me to play them?
Yes, I think it would be great for people to hear these. And by the way, the new book that's coming out, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, that'll be coming out in October, is going to have a DVD that will have all these tones on them, along with some of the images of our encounters with these extraterrestrial visitors. So that'll be coming out in October, and you can get that at disclosureproject.org beginning in October. And everyone who comes to the conference in Rio Rico outside Tucson in October will receive a complimentary copy of it. But go ahead and play that, and then we'll discuss it a little further.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Linda. That gives you an idea of sort of what they sound like. And what's interesting is it's sort of a two notes, binary notes that are coming in there, and but they're very specific in how they affect people. And when it happened in real time, of course, it's very different than an electronic recording because there's actually an effect biologically and electromagnetically in the field and on the person. And this is what we experienced, by the way, one of the very first times that I used these tones, and I sent them out over a radio signal out into space when we were making contact out in England. And ironically, we were on a Royal Trust land parcel of land in Wiltshire that was part of where the Marconi sent the first telegraph, of all things, ironically, and we sent these tones out into space. And we were there with one of our CSETI contact teams, and maybe half an hour later, we had tones come back from space that began to omnidirectionally surround us that was not identical to these, different, but was sort of, again, a binodal, a sort of binary sound that was going doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo and was moving all around us. And it had started raining and windy, and even with all that, everyone heard it. And it was not coming from you couldn't pinpoint the location. It was like it was coming from what I call infraspace, the space within, and yet you could hear it with your ears. And we have had that happen literally dozens and dozens of times, perhaps hundreds of times, as we have been out in the field where we have heard an electronic tone that has come back into the contact group after we have been using these tones and also using the mantra in group meditation out under the stars. And then, of course, the third component is that you have this really bright green laser that we send up into space that will go about 100 miles out into space that we send outward to give a specific vector of our location. So what we find is that the ET civilizations will do very interactive events with tones. They may not be identical to the ones that we're sending out, yet they will absolutely confirm that they've locked on to the group and that they're receiving them by doing something that confirms it. One time, I forget what year, Linda, in Mount Shasta, it was a couple years ago.
2005.
It was 4 years ago in 2005, almost exactly. In fact, it was the first week of September, I believe, in 2005, and we were up on Mount Shasta. And I don't know if, Linda, you want to share that account of what happened with those tones and the setting, and then perhaps play the tones from Mount Shasta.
Sure. We were sitting in meditation. You had just begun a meditation, and I believe you were approximately 1 minute into the meditation, and you paused for several seconds, and it wasn't at all coincidental that the ETs chose that pause of silence to make a brief sound that was approximately 10 feet. I was sitting to your left, and it was approximately 10 feet further to my left and back a bit. And it was a little tone, a kind of a double-toned, kind of reminiscent of these crop circle tones that lasted about 2 seconds. It was a little trilling kind of sound that lasted about 2 seconds, and it did get picked up on my recorder. And then, of course, you picked up with the meditation and went on, and we discussed it afterwards, after the meditation. And many of us, I was certainly one, I distinctly saw the sound when I heard it. And it was one of those sounds that Dr. Greer mentioned makes a picture in your mind. And what I saw was a string of kind of large gray or silver pearls, and other people saw that exact same thing.
Correct. That's right. I saw that, and it was a series of spheres, and it was like the sound manifested the form. It was so incredibly Vedic and Sanskrit, and but the sound was very electronic. It was obviously extraterrestrial in origin, and virtually everyone heard it, even though we were out in a field on the side of this mountain, Mount Shasta, with, whatever it was, 40 people. But everyone, almost everyone, actually could feel and see the form from the sound. And it was one of the most amazing experiences that we had ever had. And luckily, even though the recording that Linda got on her little tape recorder wasn't the highest quality, it gives you a sense of sort of what it sounds like, although it does not convey the multidimensional effect of actually sitting there and having it happen around you. I don't think there's anything manufactured on Earth that's a recording equipment that could capture that multi-transdimensional aspect of what happens when something like this occurs. But it certainly was felt and heard and literally seen in everyone's mind's eye at the same time during this meditation that I was leading out under the stars. And we're going to be doing that at this conference in Arizona in October, and we'll see what happens with a mass contact event and a mass consciousness event. But why don't you go ahead and play those Mount Shasta tones so people get a sense of at least what the recorder picked up.
Okay, and this isn't the exact sound my recorder picked up because that was too faint to play for anybody, but these are... we gave that tape to our sound expert, and he synthesized these tones. And actually, since it was such a short burst of tones, he looped it, and so these are much longer. It makes a longer loop that we can play in the field. And once again, it starts out at the regular speed and then gets increasingly slower. So I'll go ahead and play those. Okay, that was starting again.
Yeah, so you get a sense of that. Now, what's interesting is the similarity, although they're not identical to what was in the crop circle 20 years ago in 1989, and then by the way, did occur again in 1991, so much so that the frequency that the tones were using actually fried the circuitry of some very large and expensive BBC cameras that were in the crop circle when that happened in 91. We actually have an article from the newspaper from, I think it was, well, maybe that was 89, but they continue to happen, and we when we have been in England have had the same thing, but to have it happen at Mount Shasta, thousands of miles away with a very similar effect, but in this case there was this very clear visual effect in awareness, and you could literally see how if that tonality had continued, it would have actually materialized a spacecraft in the field where we were sitting. And in fact, it was there. It's just that it was shifted beyond the speed and frequency of light and matter, and so it was there resonating within the etheric and astral field, which is, of course, how interstellar vehicles travel. They're not staying in a solid three-dimensional form to go through interstellar space. It would be impossible because, first of all, solid matter, by definition, has to go through a transdimensional resonant frequency shift in order to go faster than the speed of light, which also means faster than the speed of electrons, et cetera, and so on. And when that happens, what you have then is that the effect of an ET craft that might be in the field all around us might be something quite strange. It may be something like these tones. It may be something that comes through our electronic device detectors, such as magnetometers and laser detectors and radar detectors, that will give off a burst of energy that will be picked up even though you're in an extremely remote area. And that's what's been happening for hours and hours each night now since we've had unbroken, nonstop, consistent contact that began this year. And I see a big crescendo of contact occurring leading up to some big event that is rather imminent, in my opinion. So I think that's one of the things that we wanted to share is this sort of connection with tonality and how it relates to interstellar communication, but also interstellar materialization. And this is actually quite understandable if one does a thorough reading and understanding of the Vedic cities and the ancient Sanskrit teachings that have to do with name and form and how the sound component of thought at a certain level of conscious awareness can actually materialize an object or allow someone to levitate or allow someone to bilocate or allow a solid object to go straight through a wall or straight through another solid object. And these are all things that have been observed with ET spacecraft. And it makes complete sense once you understand the physics of tonality, of sound, of consciousness, and of how the actual cosmos is formed, that it's a conscious quantum hologram that's awake, and that from the field of unbounded, absolute, pure awareness, the first emanation is this sound thought component. It's like in the Bible where it says, in the beginning there was the Word, and by word they're meaning sound. And so the sound component of the thought that then manifests the form, that then manifests the material object, is very much what we're dealing with when we're dealing with interstellar civilizations that, by definition, if they're here, have to have mastered technologies and sciences that deal not only with consciousness, but with sound and tonality and what I call infrasound. It's sort of like ultrasound, but it's infrasound. It's sound that's emanating from a conscious, intelligent level that then manifests an etheric and astral effect that then manifests a physical effect, whether it be a sound that you hear or a form that you see or a fully materialized spacecraft with biological life forms on board. So that's the sort of sciences and technologies we're exploring, and they very much have to do with a understanding of the cosmos as a conscious living universe, and that, in fact, everything is awake and consciousness resonating as that thing, whether it's a photon or a tree or an apple or a physical body, that the saying all this is that, meaning that everything that exists is actually the great being in the conscious mind manifesting as whatever the discrete object is. That is really what we're dealing with, and we're dealing with civilizations whose technologies have that capability. And this is really quite an exciting thing to experience as a team of people if you're sitting out under the stars together, and you begin to have all these amazing manifestations of advanced technologies, but that are also conscious and that are also involving thought and meditative states and remote viewing, but at the same time we will have lit objects that will appear that everyone will see, or a spacecraft that will fly overhead, or a very quick-moving, brilliant, almost diamond white light that will manifest 50 feet from us in a tree and hover there. We have all these on videotape. That's going to be on this DVD that's coming out with the book. And it's so much more amazing than what you would see in a movie like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because it's actually how real extraterrestrial civilizations can manifest in almost an infinite number of varied ways that range all the way from a fully materialized object to these tones and sounds that carry with them the actual form and shape of the object, to experiences people have in consciousness itself or physiologically and physically. For example, when we've had some of these encounters happen, people have actually felt a pressure wave with the tone come in directionally from, say, left to right, where there'll be a pressure field in the ear and through the body. And also people will have sort of an electromagnetic effect on their spine and on their cerebral cortex, where the hair will stand on in just a little bit. There are all these effects that happen at the same time that perhaps you have these electromagnetic detectors that are, of course, just man-made devices beginning to go off in some kind of pattern. So it's a very dynamic and exciting and amazing thing to experience, and that's what we're training people to do this, so that everyone who comes to one of these events, like we're doing in Arizona in October for 3 nights out under the stars together, will be able to go home to wherever they live and form a contact team to be an ambassador from humanity to these extraterrestrial visitors. Because until we have a more enlightened State Department and United Nations that's functional, and foreign ministries and other governments that are functional, we really have to say that citizens, just everyday people like ourselves, need to take on the task of interplanetary diplomacy, interplanetary contact, because this has been ceded to a secret world that's highly materialized and very xenophobic. And there really isn't any organized entity within any governmental structure or institution in the world that's doing this within the context of universal peace, acknowledging that really there's one universe with one people in it, and that's because we are all awake through the same light of consciousness. And that understanding that allows us to be established in a higher state of consciousness to make contact within the framework of universal commonality and universal peace. And that's what the whole CSETI CE5 initiative is about. A close encounter of the fifth kind, by the way, just to refresh your memory, is when humans go out to deliberately make contact with these visitors as opposed to just passively seeing a spacecraft or a beam or what have you. And I think that that's why for the last 19 years, we've been really intent on doing this. And by modeling this and creating this within the morphogenic field of mass awareness, what we're finding is that now we're being approached by people from the governments of various countries saying, will you teach our aerospace and technology and scientists these protocols, because we would like to make peaceful contact. We actually have a major G7 country that has approached us to do this. And so what we're finding is that this is something which is, by people doing it and practicing it, is potentiating disclosure, but also potentiating open contact between the official governments of the world and these extraterrestrial civilizations who have been reaching out to us, but are not pushy about it. They're not going to land on the White House lawn before they're properly invited. And so I think that it's really an exciting time to realize that people gathering together to do this and to use these protocols of contact that involve consciousness, the mantras, meditation, remote viewing, these tones, as well as these lasers that we use, that we send up to give an exact, precise location for our team, that what we're seeing is that not only is there an escalating, increasing level of contact happening with our own research and efforts, but that this is being observed by a number of mainstream governmental officials in various countries who are taking great interest in it and are very supportive of it. So, of course, governments always lag behind the people, and I've always said that if the people will lead, the leaders will follow, and that in reality, people have to create within the morphogenic field of consciousness leading to thought and action that's in the correct direction, a certain momentum, and then that will sort of pull along the establishment leadership of the world, which is always a lagging indicator. I mean, they're never, ironically, even though it's called the world leaders, in reality they very rarely lead at all. I think that the real leadership comes from just everyday people doing extraordinary things because they're inspired to do so, and that's really what we are. We're, we're housewives and we're doctors and we're accountants and we're engineers and construction people or whoever. And the CSETI CE5 initiative contact teams that exist now all over the world are just made up of various people from society practicing these protocols and who are having amazing contact. I just got a report a couple of days ago from a team we have up in Quebec, in the Montreal area, that went out to an area where about 2 years ago we did a training for about 50 people in an area called Bromont, and they had amazing contact happen throughout the night on multiple levels, not only with sightings and craft that flew overhead, but also in consciousness and some other very mysterious things that happened where they were actually physically touched by some of these ET beings that would appear and then vanish around them. And this is happening with completely independent of my being there. So, I mean, my presence isn't necessary. My only purpose is to try to share the concepts and principles and the techniques, and then people go and do it, and they're having these amazing things happen.
Lots of people have. When I used to live in California, my contact group would go out. We had a site on the coast south of San Francisco, and we had amazing things happen quite often, and we did have some sound things happen, and we had some things happen with the radar detector, just short bursts, up to the point that we started having Orion transmissions, and now we're getting just hours and hours of bursts from the radar detectors. But it's always amazing, and there's been times, I can think of one time, well, these sounds, the true ET sounds are often, not always, but often omnidirectional. So people, it's sitting around in our circle, hear them, and they say, well, I heard it from the east. Well, I heard it from the west. And it turns out everyone heard it from a different direction. Or there was once, I remember, that I heard a sound that was like, it had the shape of an arrow of sound that went in my right ear, through my head, and out my left ear. And maybe 4 or 5 people sitting, Dr. Greer heard it in a similar way, and 4 or 5 people sitting where I was sitting heard it, but then some other people sitting right in that same vicinity didn't hear it, but then other people on the other side of the circle heard it and had the similar experience. And I could have sworn that was loud enough that my tape recorder would have captured it, and that sound was only inside our heads. It was not captured on the recorder.
Yes, and what's interesting, when that happens, and yet multiple people hear exactly the same thing, and yet it's not picked up by an electronic recording device. So you're dealing with some very interesting transdimensional effects that are, way beyond, what we normally think of in terms of technology, because what we tend to do is superimpose our worldview, which is very reductionist and materialistic, on interstellar civilizations that are several 100,000 to, in some cases, several million years technologically and, I might say, socially and spiritually more developed than we are on Earth right now in 2009. And so you have to keep a very open mind about how these very advanced civilizations that have the ability to travel through interstellar distances might actually appear in our space-time and materialize in ways that are not exactly like something out of a Hollywood movie. That, in fact, the variety and the astounding ways that we have seen these ET civilizations interface with our research groups is really much more nuanced and complex and interesting than a Hollywood movie, although it's something that for most people is rather confusing at first, because everyone has seen so much television and so many movies that they're expecting to go and kick the tires on an ET spacecraft. And of course, one of the things I point out is that, well, certainly we have had ET spacecraft fully materialized and have had them at fairly close range and near us. The way that is more common is particularly because there are classified military programs that are targeting these ET spacecraft and are increasingly able to track them and hit them with electromagnetic weapon systems, that what we're finding is that these ET spacecraft often choose not to be in a fully linear space-time materialized form, but will be interfacing with us, both the consciousness of the extraterrestrial people as well as their technologies will be interfacing with us in much more subtle and nuanced ways, which are actually beautiful and amazing. But it's very much not what people would expect if they read a book on this subject or looked at a video or a movie. So it's interesting. What we're trying to do is now share through this book that's coming out this October and at this conference in Arizona, the way that actual extraterrestrial contact takes place and the multiplicity of ways. And, of course, everyone, can identify an object if it's fully materialized in linear space-time. But what about all these other thousands of ways that they might appear around you or around a research group? These are things that have not ever been talked about, and I think we need to begin to talk about it because I think that this is our understanding of how we cross more into their understanding of reality, the understanding of reality that is transdimensional, conscious, that goes beyond linear space-time and materialized objects, that is involving everything from consciousness and thought to tones and sound, lights, orbs, objects that can blip in and out of linear space-time and then dematerialize in a fraction of a second. And thankfully, for the past year or so, we have gotten a nearly fourth-generation night scope that we're hooked up to a very good digital video camera, and we're beginning to capture some of this, although obviously anything that's beyond the electromagnetic spectrum of light and faster than the frequency of light may not be picked up, including some of the sounds that everyone will hear, but they're hearing them from, as I mentioned, sort of infraspace, and it may be not something that's actually going to be able to be picked up by a electromagnetic recorder. So, we're kind of testing the limits of what kinds of detection equipment, we have and obviously can afford, because some of this equipment, like this night scope with the camera, is on the order of a $5,000 piece of equipment. So, you can only have so much of these kinds of things out there with people who know how to operate them when you're a volunteer, unfunded project. But we don't exactly have NASA's budget. But if we did, we could really do some amazing things. But I think that we're doing what we can with what we have, but we're still finding some amazing results.
Definitely. It's always amazing, and one of the things, the qualities of the sounds that we're receiving and the other vibrations that come through the sounds. We had some amazing activity in Creston, Colorado, through the radar detectors this past June, and we were out at our normal location, and from the first night, the radar detectors started going off, and then the ETs were so tuned into us that as soon as we'd step into the field, every evening they would start going off. Well, we changed sites at this one day. We went up to Blanca Peak, where we often go at least once out of the week that we're in Colorado, and as soon as we got up there and brought out the radar detectors, they started going off, and they had never gone off at this place before, and they also had never gone off at our other research site in Colorado. So we also, by the way, had a little omnidirectional tone that happened up there on Blanca Peak, right outside our circle. I was kind of going through my recordings last night and happened upon a spot where Dr. Greer was mentioning, I wonder if that got recorded. And so I backed it up, and it did get recorded. Once again, it was a fairly faint sound, but I'll have to pass it on to our sound expert, because it was kind of a beep beep kind of sound, but it was outside of our circle. But in any case, it was after we had some amazing effects in sound and consciousness up on Blanca Peak that a man in his 70s in our group, the next day we got together, and he made an announcement that his back, which he had seriously degenerative discs in his back for 44 years, and he woke up pain-free that next morning for the first time in 44 years, and remains pain-free today. He says he's in his 70s, and he says he's doing things he hasn't been able to do since he was in his 30s.
Right, and we have had many of these sort of healing events happen when we've been making contact like this, where people, and it's interesting because the night that he had that healing of his degenerative back problems, I was having an enormous amount of energy that was coming through consciousness and then through the etheric field and the electromagnetic field of my body, creating an enormous kundalini effect. And I knew that there was some kind of energy work that was happening. And we have seen this happen, by the way, on more than one occasion. We had a member of our team up in Canada, in Quebec, that had gone up to an area called Lake Edward, way north in north of Montreal. And this person had been diagnosed with a breast cancer and was scheduled to have surgery. And they went up and they had amazing contacts happen and literally had a red sphere come into a building where they had gone in because it had gotten very cold that night. And it moved up and down her body. And when she went back to Montreal that following week to have the surgery done and what have you, it was gone. It had vanished and was completely gone. And this has been proven by ultrasound and X-rays and what have you, and mammograms. And what we have found is that there are so many ways that these extraterrestrial visitors are interfacing, and it'll be seen and it'll be felt, and then there'll be these effects that people will have, some of which are quite unexpected and very beautiful, like this elderly gentleman who had this wonderful healing of his chronic back problem. So, it just never ends. One of the things I wanted to mention, of course, you've heard us talk about the Orion transmissions that began about a year and a half ago in Joshua Tree in November of 2007, and they have really reached a crescendo where even last month when we were here in Charlottesville doing one of these one-day workshops, we had almost an unbroken series of these tones. But what was interesting is that the electromagnetic detectors and laser radar detectors were set up in the field, and they were silent. When I walked into the circle, I had parked my vehicle, and we'd gotten out, and as I entered the far perimeter of the circle where people had made a circle to sit, at that instant, they started going off. And it was very bizarre. It was like they were waiting and observing, and as soon as I entered the field, they all started going off. And this is something which has happened over and over again, and what that kind of is saying to me personally as sort of the director of the project is that they're almost continuously locked on to what we're doing, and they love when we get together to do this and teach this information to people, and they make that affirmation very clear. That's the message I'm taking away from that. And I don't know if you have those recorded, set up so you can play that, Linda, the ones that we've had at the Orion transmissions from Joshua Tree. But people need to understand we're out in the most remote areas where people who have these detectors in their vehicles will say, they never, ever even get a beep out of them. And we'll have literally 4 or 5 hours a night now, where it started with 23 minutes. Now we're having hours and hours and hours to the point that we have to silence them so we can do our meditation, where there's this continuous electromagnetic lock-on that's happening. And there's absolutely no man-made source for these. And they happen in a certain pattern where there is sort of a coded message. It's very communicative. And even when we will make a comment, sometimes I'll make a deep comment about consciousness or about the purpose of these extraterrestrial visitors being here to help humanity and understand us and to be here ready to welcome us to a peaceful universal civilization. They will go off with comments that are made by me or other people. In other words, they will accentuate the conversation like they're listening. The other bizarre aspect of this is that when we, for example, were up on Blanca Peak and I was doing a puja, and we were out overlooking this huge, beautiful valley, and the detectors were silent until I entered the circle. Again, we drove up. They were already out there and had been silent. As we arrived, they started talking. and we call them talking because it really is communicative, and it was unbroken activity from these electromagnetic detectors that pick up laser and radar and X-band and K-band and what have you. And we've also had magnetometers that do the same thing. Well, as soon as we went to go do the puja and do this sort of sacred ceremony to honor the tradition of the enlightened beings going back to eternity who brought the knowledge of consciousness and enlightenment to Earth, they became silent, completely silent, as if they were listening. And they did the same thing in Charlottesville in the field when we were entering into that same state. So it's extremely interactive. It isn't as if it's just some mechanical thing. It's very conscious, it's very interactive, and it's rather astonishing to behold. So with that introduction, why don't you play those tunes that happened there?
Okay, I'll play these, and I'll just add that these tones are so interactive with us in the field when they give the little chirps of punctuation or affirmation to things that Dr. Greer and other people say. I mean, it's actually humorous. They show a sense of humor and they show a personality. And in Crestone, for example, a week of getting to know two different radar detectors. One was the techie one and one was the heart one, and you could totally feel that out of them. It was amazing. But I'll go ahead and play just this. It's a 3-minute clip of what happened in Joshua Tree in 2008. And okay, it starts out rather quietly.
Well, that was bright. Yeah, it's moving too. Instead of that light in the northeast. This is an ET vehicle up here. It's an exo-atmosphere. Now they're confirming one. Please listen. This is the master control craft from the Deep Space Center. See? And we will be bathed in celestial knowledge and light. Look at this, various frequencies simultaneously. Now see the craft that is here around us and your actual celestial region and the beings who are here. Open your hands like this and let your energy pour into you. The knowledge of this transmission. I told our group that as soon as we arrived in a circle here, this would happen.
Yeah, you did.
Midnight.
You did.
Oh, that's the other detector. There's two of them. And yet another frequency is a PM? Yep. I said yes.
The one under my chair
There's a being right here.
speaks loudly and softly.
There's a being right here. You can't hear me. Oh my God.
So you can get a sense of this and how amazing we're out in the middle of Joshua Tree National Park, 30 miles from any man-made source of anything like this. And this starts happening, and it starts out, and it builds to this crescendo. What you're not getting from, because you can barely hear my voice and others in the background, is that there was this enormous effect on the body and the electromagnetic field of my body as this was happening, and also on other people, and that this is amazing contact. And I've often joked that the the SETI project, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to listen from a sound from outer space. And we're out there in a field with less than $500 worth of equipment, and we're getting hours of this sort of detection and communication that's happening transdimensionally while there are objects up in the sky that we're filming that are ET craft, that are exoatmospheric, that are set up above our group and moving around. So I think that it's a very interesting sort of juxtaposition of things, and it has a certain a strange irony to it. But the experience of this is quite beautiful, and it is very interactive. And there is through consciousness that I'm experiencing, other people experience, a sense of emotion and meaning and content to these transmissions that we've tried to translate, and it will be in this new book. I think the other thing to remember is that it is very, very interactive, and that we will have more than one of these detectors there, and they will be going off on different bands at the same time, which is technically impossible. If you were to have, say, a microwave source or a man-made source, it would make all the detectors in that same area that are only a few feet away go off on the same band, whether it was X band or K band or laser band or what have you. What we're having is that we'll have a laser band going off at the same time as a X band or some other band or a KA band, and at the same time. And this is simply technically not possible if it was a man-made source. The other thing to remember is that they're not really coming linearly, being shot or flowing from space to us. It's actually coming from within space. So it's coming from within the circuitry of the detector and within our own conscious field and bioelectric field of the people in the group. So this is a very interesting experience. And this is going on while there's also consciousness experiences and remote viewing experiences and sighting of craft and objects in the space around us. So it's all a very dynamic process, and this is what we're wanting to teach people about this so that they become very comfortable with the kind of contact that happens. And it's very, very beautiful and an amazing thing to behold, really.
Remember, as we were leaving Blanca Peak that night in Crestone, and Walter, who had the one radar detector, we were in the parking lot and loading up our cars, and suddenly it started going bananas, and he held it up and we were watching it because there's a light readout on it. You can read the bands that are going off, or city or highway. It was making sounds. It was cranking in rapid succession through every single band, highway, city, whatever. It was just like going nuts.
Yep.
And the only time, it just quit when he turned it off.
Yeah, it was like it was saying goodbye as we were gathering together to leave.
Well,
I think it's been about an hour, so I guess we need to say goodbye to all of you good folks. And I'd like to thank the people at the World Puja Network for letting us share this rather interesting and fascinating area of research and study. And I hope all of you can join us. You can find out more about the conference at CSETI.org/contact. And I hope I'll see you in Arizona. And we will be sharing next time the information about how mass consciousness and meditation can transform the world from its current state to the state of its destiny, and that is a peaceful, universal civilization on Earth. So until next time, thank all of you. Thank you, Linda, and I'd like to thank the people at World Puja Network. This has been Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and until next time, goodbye.